Hello, my friend. Thank you for coming back and sitting with me today. There is a sentence many of us have heard from our mothers. I'm fine. A very short sentence, so familiar, so light that sometimes we believe it right away. She is tired. I'm fine. She eats dinner alone. I'm used to it. Her back hurts. That's just getting older. She feels sad. It's nothing, sweetheart. She misses you. You're busy. Take care of what you need to do. Some mothers say that sentence so often it almost becomes a habit, not because they truly need nothing, but because they do not want to make their children worry. They do not want to become one more thing their children have to carry. They do not want to feel like a burden in a life that is already full. Today, I want to tell you about a woman named Margaret. Margaret was in her late 60s. She had a daughter named Emily, and Emily loved her mother. She called. She sent gifts on holidays. She always asked, "Are you okay, Mom?" And every time Margaret would answer, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." But there was something Emily did not understand. Sometimes when a mother says, "I'm fine," it is not really an answer. It is a small door. And what she may be hoping is that someone will knock one more time. Margaret lived alone in a small house in suburban Pennsylvania. It was the house she and her husband had bought more than 30 years earlier. A white house with a low fence out front, an old pear tree in the backyard, a wooden porch swing near the front window. In the spring, Margaret planted geraniums in clay pots by the windows. In the winter, she hung a small wreath on the front door, even though no one lived with her anymore to decorate the Christmas tree the way they used to. Her husband, Thomas, had passed away 4 years earlier. Not suddenly, not loudly, just a long illness. And then one quiet morning in the hospital, he held Margaret's hand, took one soft breath, and was gone. After that, the house became quieter. Not all at once. At first, people came by. Neighbors brought food. Friends from church called. Emily stayed with her mother for a few days. Sympathy cards covered the dining table. Everyone said, "If you need anything, call." Margaret thanked each person. And every time she said, "I'm all right." Slowly, everyone's life returned to its own rhythm. And that was not wrong. Life keeps moving. People have work, families, bills, children, things that need to be done. But Margaret's house did not return to what it had been. Thomas's chair at the dining table was still there. His favorite coffee mug was still in the cabinet. His winter coat stayed hanging in the hallway longer than it needed to. Some mornings, Margaret still made 2 cups of coffee out of habit. Then she would remember and pour 1 cup down the sink. She did not cry every time. Some days she would just stand there, watching the brown water disappear, and say to herself, "Well, that's silly." But the kitchen did not laugh back. It only stayed quiet. Emily, Margaret's daughter, lived almost 2 hours away. She was 37, married, with a 6-year-old son named Noah. She worked in an insurance office. It was not the job she had dreamed about when she was younger, but it was stable. And Emily's days were full of small responsibilities: getting Noah to school, going to work, answering emails, buying groceries, making dinner, doing laundry, reading to Noah before bed, picking up toys that somehow appeared in every room of the house. Emily loved her mother. She truly did. She called Margaret a few times a week, usually while driving home from work or while making dinner. "Did you eat, Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Are you sleeping okay?" "I'm sleeping." "Do you need me to come by this weekend?" No. You have Noah. You have work. I'm fine." And Emily usually believed her, not because she did not care, but because Margaret always said it with such a calm, steady voice. as if everything inside her had already been arranged neatly and put away. One evening, Emily said to her husband, Jason, "My mom is so strong. I don't know if I could live alone like that after losing my husband." Jason said, "Maybe she just doesn't want you to worry." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know, but every time I ask, she says she's fine." Jason looked at her. "Maybe you should ask one more time." Emily nodded. But then Noah called from the living room because he had spilled juice on the rug, and the conversation ended there, like many things in life. Not forgotten, just covered over by whatever needed attention next. Margaret had small routines that helped give shape to her days. Every morning, she opened the living room curtains at 7, made a cup of tea, fed her gray cat, Henry, watered the plants by the window, then sat at the kitchen table with the local newspaper. She did not read all of it, mostly the weather, the obituaries, and sometimes news about the old school Emily had once attended. On Wednesdays, she went to the grocery store. On Fridays, she went to church and helped organize the hymnals. On Sundays, she sat in the fourth pew on the left, near the stained glass window. After the service, a few people would ask, "Margaret, how are you doing this week?" She would smile. "I'm fine." They would ask, "Do you need us to come by and help with anything?" She would shake her head. "No, thank you. I can still manage." And it was true. She could still manage. She could still drive, still cook, still pay her bills, still remember her medicine, still change a light bulb in the living room, as long as the ladder was not too high. But there are the things a person can still do by themselves that do not mean they are not lonely while doing them. Some afternoons, Margaret sat on the porch swing, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, watching the street in front of the house, neighbors' cars passing by, children riding bicycles, the mailman stopping, then moving on. Everything was still moving, but Margaret sometimes felt as if she were sitting on the edge of a life that had once been very full. She did not want to complain. She knew she was fortunate. She had a house, a daughter who loved her, a healthy grandson, enough strength to care for herself. She reminded herself of these things whenever her heart felt empty. "I shouldn't ask for too much," she would think. And then, if Emily called, Margaret would make her voice a little brighter. "Hello, sweetheart. What are you doing, Mom?" "Oh, nothing much. I'm fine." That autumn, Emily began to notice small things. Nothing dramatic, just tiny cracks in the sentence, "I'm fine." One evening, Emily called her mother while folding laundry. Noah was asleep. Jason was downstairs washing dishes. "What are you doing, Mom?" Margaret said, "I'm watching TV." "What show?" There was a small pause. "Oh, I don't really know. I just turned it on for the sound." Emily stopped folding Noah's shirt. "What do you mean?" Margaret gave a soft laugh. "Nothing. The house gets too quiet, so I turn the TV on." Emily did not know what to say. She only asked, "Do you want me to video call you with Noah?" "No, that's all right. He's probably asleep." "He is." "Then you should rest too. You have work tomorrow." The call ended. Emily sat on the bed for a while, still holding her son's little shirt. Her mother's words stayed with her. "The house gets too quiet, so I turn the TV on." It was not a complaint. It was not an accusation, just a small truth, said very softly. A week later, Emily stopped by her mother's house on a Sunday afternoon. She had told Margaret ahead of time that she could only stay for a little while because Noah had swim class at 5. Margaret had made apple pie, not one slice, the whole pea. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and butter. "You made pie?" Margaret smiled. "Yes, it's been a while." Emily looked at the pie on the table. "Mom, you knew I was only stopping by for a little bit." "I know." Margaret opened the cabinet for plates. You can take some home for Jason and Noah. Emily sat down at the table. Margaret cut a slice, placed it in front of her, then poured coffee. While her mother's back was turned, Emily looked around the kitchen. Everything was clean. Everything was neat. But there was only one cup on the table, one napkin, one chair pulled out. The other chairs were still tucked in, as if the house had learned how to prepare for one person. Emily felt something in her chest sink a little. She took a bite of pie. "This is so good, Mom." Margaret smiled. "Same old recipe. Grandma's?" "Yes." Then Margaret began telling her about Emily's grandmother, how she never measured anything, how she would always say, "You can tell by looking." Emily looked at the clock. 4:15. She needed to leave in 15 minutes. Noah had swim class. But Margaret was still talking. Her voice had grown warmer, her eyes a little brighter, as if some little door inside her had opened. Emily listened for a few more minutes. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Jason. "Are you still there?" Noah's asking. Emily looked at the screen, then at her mother. Margaret saw her expression. She stopped talking. "You need to go?" Emily hesitated. "Yes. Noah has swim class." Margaret nodded right away. "Of course, go. Don't let him be late." "Are you sure you're okay?" Margaret smiled. "I'm fine." Emily stood, hugged her mother, took the box of pie Margaret had already packed, then walked out to the car. As she backed out of the driveway, she looked toward the kitchen window. Margaret was still standing there, one hand holding the edge of the curtain, sobbing, waving softly saucies. She did not look unhappy, but she did not look completely fine either. And for the first time, Emily wondered how many times in her life she had heard the words, "I'm fine," when really they were only her mother's way of helping her leave without feeling heavy. November came. The weather turned colder. The leaves on the pear tree behind Margaret's house had almost all fallen. One evening, Emily received a call from her mother's neighbor, Linda. Linda had lived next door to Margaret for more than 20 years. Her voice sounded concerned. "Emily, don't panic. Your mother is all right. But I thought you should know. Today I saw her outside trying to pull the trash bin down to the curb. She slipped." Emily stood up. "She fell?" "No, not completely. I caught her. But I think you should know. She kept telling me not to call you." Emily closed her eyes. Of course she did. Her mother did not want to bother anyone. "Is she hurt?" "She says she isn't. But you know Margaret." Emily thanked Linda, then called her mother right away. Margaret answered after a few rings. "Hello, sweetheart." "Mom, why didn't you tell me what happened this afternoon?" There was a pause. "What happened?" "You slipped outside." "Oh, that was nothing. I'm fine." Emily closed her eyes again. This time the sentence did not sound light. It hurt. "Mom, Linda said if she hadn't been there, you might have fallen." "But I didn't fall." "You could have." "Emily," Margaret's voice softened, "you have so much going on. I didn't want you to worry." Emily stood in the living room, holding the phone. Noah was playing with Legos on the floor. Jason looked at her from the kitchen. Emily said slowly, "Mom, I'm your daughter. I'm allowed to worry about you." Margaret was quiet. On the other end, Emily could hear the television playing softly. Maybe her mother had turned it on again, so the house would not feel so silent. Finally, Margaret said, "I know." But her voice was smaller than usual. Emily sat down on the edge of the couch. "Are you hurting anywhere?" "No, just shaken up a little. I'm coming by tomorrow." "You don't have to." "Mom." This time Emily did not ask. Her voice was gentle, but steady. "I'm coming by tomorrow." Margaret did not answer right away. Then she let out a breath. "All right, if you have time." Emily looked down at her hand. She wanted to say, "I will have time," but she did not make a big promise. She simply said, "I'll come after work." The next day, Emily went to her mother's house. She did not bring a gift. There was no special occasion, only a bag of hot soup from the little place Margaret liked, and a loaf of bread. Margaret opened the door. "You didn't have to bring food." "I know." Emily stepped inside. "But I wanted to." They ate dinner in the kitchen. Nothing big. Tomato soup, bread, hot tea. Henry the gray cat curled near the heater. Outside the window, it was already dark. Emily did not look at the clock. She did not put her phone on the table. She did not say she could only stay for a little while. At first, Margaret did not seem used to it. She asked, "Where's Noah?" "At home with Jason." "Doesn't he need you?" "He's okay." "Don't you have work to do?" "Yes, but it can wait." Margaret looked at her daughter. Something in her face softened. After dinner, Emily stood up to wash the dishes. Margaret said right away, "Leave them. I can do it." "No, I'll do them tonight. I'm still able to wash dishes." "I know you are." Emily turned and looked at her mother. "But I want to." Margaret did not argue after that. She stayed at the table, both hands around her tea, watching her daughter wash dishes in her kitchen. A small smile rested on her face, not because the dishes were being cleaned, but because there was a sound in the kitchen, water running, a person moving around, her daughter standing there. When Emily finished, she dried her hands and sat across from her mother. She took a breath. "Mom." "Yes? I want to ask you something." Margaret looked at her. Emily said, "How are you really doing?" Margaret smiled out of habit. "I'm fine." But this time Emily did not nod right away. She did not change the subject. She simply sat there, looking at her mother, not pushing, not rushing. After a few seconds, Margaret looked down at her tea. The smile on her face slowly faded. She said quietly, "I don't know." Emily felt her heart tighten, but she did not interrupt. Margaret ran her finger gently around the rim of the cup. "Some days I really am fine," she said. "Some days I wake up, water the plants, go to the store, talk to Linda, and I think, I can still do this." She stopped for a moment. "But some days, the house is so quiet." Emily sat very still. Margaret continued, "Some days I start to tell your father something, and then I remember he isn't sitting in the living room anymore." She gave a small laugh, but her eyes were red now. "Some days I cook more than I need and have to put it away. Some days my phone lights up and I think it might be you calling, but it is just an advertisement." Emily put a hand over her mouth. Margaret quickly said, "I'm not telling you this to make you sad." "I know," Emily whispered. Margaret looked at her daughter. Sometimes I miss having someone in the house." The kitchen became quiet. Very quiet, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that comes when something true has finally been placed gently between two people. Emily reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "Mom," her tears began to fall. "I'm sorry I believed I'm fine too easily." Margaret shook her head right away. "No, sweetheart, don't apologize." "But I didn't ask again. And I didn't say anything." They looked at each other. And in that moment, Emily understood that love between a mother and a daughter is sometimes not missing. It is simply trying too hard to protect itself. The mother says, "I'm fine," so the child can go on with a lighter heart. The daughter believes her, because life is full and moving quickly. No one is bad. No one is completely wrong. There are just some things that, when they are not spoken, sit quietly in the heart for a very long time. Emily squeezed her mother's hand. "From now on, when I ask if you're okay, I'm going to stay long enough to hear the answer." Margaret looked at her daughter. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she smiled. Then I'll try to answer a little more honestly, Sue. They both laughed softly, a small laugh, wet with tears, but warm. After that night, Emily did not become a perfect daughter. Her life was still busy. Noah still needed to get to school. Work still had emails. The house still had bills. Tired days still came. But something changed. Emily no longer asked, "Are you okay, Mom?" as a quick opening to a phone call. She asked more slowly. And after she asked, she stayed quiet. She gave her mother room to answer. At first, Margaret still often said, "I'm fine." But then she would add a little more. "I'm fine. I just missed your father today." Or, "I'm fine. It rained and the house felt quiet." Or, "I'm fine. But if you could come by Sunday, I'd be happy." Those sentences did not make Emily see her mother as weaker. They made her feel closer, more real. No longer just the strong woman on the other end of the phone, but her mother, a person who had loved her for her whole life, and who also had days when she needed to be loved back with presence. Emily began bringing Noah to Margaret's house on some Sunday afternoons. Not every Sunday. That was not always possible, but often enough that the house began to hear a child's footsteps again. Noah liked sitting on the wooden porch swing. He liked feeding Henry. He liked asking his grandmother about Grandpa Thomas, whom he only remembered a little. Margaret told Noah that Grandpa used to make soup that was good, but always too salty. That he always whistled when he fixed things in the garage. That he once carried Emily on his shoulders during a 4th of July parade. Noah listened carefully. Emily sat nearby, watching her mother tell the stories. She realized that when Margaret spoke about Thomas, her voice was not only sad, it also became brighter, as if memory, when shared, became a little less heavy than when carried alone. One afternoon, as Emily was getting ready to leave, Margaret stood on the porch. It was late fall. The wind was gentle. Noah ran ahead to the car, holding a box of cookies his grandmother had packed for him. Emily hugged her mother. "I'm not sure we can come next Sunday. Noah has a birthday party." Margaret nodded. "That's all right. You take care of what you need to do." Emily stepped back and looked at her. Margaret noticed the look and laughed softly. "All right, I'll say it more honestly." Emily smiled. Margaret said, "I'll miss you both, but I'll be okay. And if you can video call that evening, I'd like that." Emily hugged her again. "We will." Margaret patted her back. "That's enough." A few months later, Margaret's 68th birthday came around. Emily asked what she wanted to do. Margaret said, "Oh, I don't need anything. I don't like a big fuss." Emily almost believed her. But this time she asked one more question. "If not a big fuss, then what small thing would you like?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I would like dinner at home. You, Jason, Noah. And if you have time, I would like to make apple pie with you." Emily smiled. "Grandma's recipe?" "Yes. The one with no measurements?" Margaret laughed. "You can tell by looking." On the night of her birthday, Margaret's kitchen was full of sound again. Jason helped set the table. Noah dropped flour on the floor. Emily and Margaret stood side by side at the counter, peeling apples, mixing cinnamon, rolling dough. Margaret showed her daughter how to look at the color of the filling, how to touch the edge of the dough to know if it was soft enough, how to sprinkle sugar without using a measuring spoon. Emily said, "You know I'll ruin this if you never write it down, right?" Margaret laughed. "If it turns out badly, we'll eat it with ice cream." Noah ran into the kitchen. "I want ice cream." Jason called from the dining room. "I want ice cream too." Everyone laughed. Margaret stood at the counter, flour on her hands, and looked around the house. Thomas was not there. His chair was still empty, and maybe in her heart, that empty place would always remain. But that night, the house held more than absence. It held laughter. The smell of apple pie, a grandson running from room to room, a daughter standing beside her, a new kind of life gently filling some of the quiet space, not replacing what had been lost, only making the house warm again. After dinner, when Noah had fallen asleep on the sofa, Emily helped her mother put away the leftovers. Margaret took an old photograph from a drawer. In the picture, Emily was about 8 years old, standing on a chair in the kitchen, holding a rolling pin, flour on her face. Thomas stood behind her, laughing. Margaret stood beside Emily, much younger then. "I found this last week," Margaret said. Emily held the photograph. She looked at her mother in the picture, then at her mother standing in front of her now. Time had passed. So much time. But her mother's eyes were still the same. Emily said, "You kept so many things." Margaret smiled. "That's what mothers do." Emily looked at the picture for another moment, then said, "I'm glad you told me what you really wanted tonight." Margaret folded a towel on the table. "I am too." She paused. "Actually, saying it wasn't as frightening as I thought." Emily gave a small laugh. "For me too." Margaret looked at her. "What do you mean?" Emily placed the photograph on the table. "I was afraid to ask honestly, because I was afraid the answer would make me feel like I hadn't done enough." Margaret stepped closer. She placed a hand on Emily's cheek. "You do not have to do everything." She said it gently. "Just don't make me pretend I need nothing." Emily closed her eyes for a second, then nodded. "I understand. You know, at some point in life, most of us have heard someone we love say, 'I'm fine.' And sometimes they really are. But sometimes, 'I'm fine' is simply the way they love us, the way they try not to worry us, the way they make their own sadness smaller so our life can feel a little lighter. There are many mothers like Margaret, strong, capable, able to cook dinner for one, able to drive themselves to the store, able to smile during a quick phone call, able to say, 'I'm fine.' But being strong does not mean never being lonely. Being capable does not mean never needing to be asked. And saying, 'I'm fine,' does not always mean there is nothing in the heart. The beautiful thing about Emily's story is not that she became a perfect daughter. She could not be there every moment. She could not quit her job. She could not make sure her mother never felt sad again. But she learned to ask one more time, to stay a little longer, to listen a little more slowly, and sometimes just that little bit more is enough to help a mother stop being strong all by herself. I think there are simple questions that, when asked with real tenderness, can open a room that has been closed for a long time. How are you really doing, Mom? Were you lonely today? Did you miss Dad? Would you like me to stay a little longer? Not to force someone to speak, only to let them know that, if they want to speak, someone is there to listen. If today's story made you think of your mother, or of someone in your life who always says they are fine, I hope you hold that feeling gently, not as blame, not as guilt, but as a soft reminder that sometimes behind the words, "I'm fine," there is a heart that loves us very much and still needs to be loved in return. Maybe today all it takes is a call that is not rushed, or a few extra minutes at the door, or asking one more time with a gentle voice, "Mom, how are you really? Thank you for sitting with me today. I truly appreciate it." Until our next story, take good care of yourself. And if there is someone in your life who always says, "I'm fine," maybe next time you can stay long enough to hear what they have not said. This is Companion, stories that remind us what truly matters.